Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today, we are starting Book 7 of the Politics, which is about the best regime. 7 and 8, Book 7 and 8 deals with the so-called best regime, or the regime that we would pray for. So let's go right into the chapter, right into the chapter. So chapter 1 we're doing today. Concerning the best regime, one who is going to undertake the investigation appropriate to it must necessarily discuss first what his most choice-worthy way of life is. In other words, so if we're going to talk about the best, we have to be choice about what way of life. Any investigation about the best regime must address the question of what way of life is best. Okay, so okay, as long as this is unclear, the best regime must necessarily be as unclear as well. For it is appropriate for those who govern themselves best on the basis of what is available to them to act in the best manner, provided nothing occurs contrary to reasonable expectations. So, so he's basically saying that until you understand, until we have clarity about what way of life is best, what the best regime is going to be a problem. Why? For it is appropriate for those who govern themselves best on occasion on the basis of what is available to them to act in the best manner, provided nothing occurs contrary to reasonable expectations, right? Hence, there should be first an agreement on which is the most choice-worthy way of life of all, so to speak. After this, whether the same or a different way of life is choice-worthy for men in common and separately for individuals. So therefore, is it first question is what is the best way of life, so to speak, and whether it's the same or it's different for regards to regarding to what is common versus what can we achieve individually. So isn't the best that we can achieve individually something we can achieve commonly, or what can we? In other words, what is best common versus what is best individually? So what is the common, which is that all men in a community share the carnoia, can share, that can partake in and be best, right? Um, concerning considering as adequate, then, much of what has been said in the external discourses concerning the best way of life, we must use that as well. So, what is meant by this? This is it is not known what works he's talking about, and generally, the problem of external discourses. See this discussion of this for an analysis of the tortuous but critical importance about the first three chapters of Book 7. See Lord's famous book, his own book, a 1982 book about this chapter, pages 180 and 202. I'm going to argue maybe this is also about the best way of life that is talked about earlier, but all the way back in the beginning of the the first politics, book 1, about the way of life, and maybe about in the ethics, about the question of the contemplative life versus the practical life, right? This is the whole question in the ethics about the question of which way of life is best. So does the discussion of the ethics about the question of the way of life, of which concerning way of life is best? So therefore, maybe we should pay attention to the ethics here. This tension between the political way of life, the life of action versus the life of contemplation, right? This seems to be as much relevant here as the discussion of the best, the discussion in Book 1 about the city and the different thing. So let's take these consideration. For in truth, no one would dispute that being being a distinction among three groups of good things, that those that are eternal, those of the body, and those of the soul, all these things ought to be available to the blessed. Reading Hopatometer manuscript, following Ross rather than bracketing this. So therefore, this is the way he's making certain choices on how to do this. In other words, of these things, all these three things. So there, one, those good things that are the eternal, external to men, those of the body, and those of the soul. Material goods, right? External goods are material goods in a sense. Eternal of the person. Things, the goods, all of these things must be. So the external goods, the body, and the soul. Okay, all these things ought to be available to the blessed, the ones who are blessed, right? No one would assert that a person is blessed who has no part of courage, moderation, and justice, prudence, but is afraid of flies buzzing around him. Abstains from none of the extremes when he desires to eat or drink. Kills his dearest friends for trifle, and similarly regarding the things connected with the mind, is senseless and thoroughly deceived by false perceptions of things, as a child or a madman. So in other words, you can't call this person blessed. These things, they have no virtue, no character, like this, and it's senseless. It's easily deceived, like a child or a madman, right? Uh, uh, Yet, while all would admit that what has been said, they differ in regard to how much of each type of good is desirable, and their relative degree of preeminence. So, therefore, external, in other words, these three things are good, but what should be concerned more external goods? You know, how or should the soul take more over the precedent of the body over the material good? How does this work? What is their how much of each type and their relative degree of preeminence, right? For men consider any amount of virtue to be adequate, but wealth, goods, power, reputation, and all such things they seek to excess without limit. So therefore, virtue, they might just say, okay, a little bit of virtue, but wealth is excess without limit, right? We shall say to them that it is easy to conceive oneself concerning these matters through the facts as well. When one sees that men do not acquire and safeguard the virtues as means of external things, but the latter by means of the former, and that living happily, human beings find it in enjoyment or in virtue or in both, is available to those who have excess of have to excess the adornments of character and mind, but behave moderately in respect to external acquisitions of good things, rather than those who possess more of the latter than what is useful, but are deficient with the former, that is, character and virtue, right? Um, uh, so therefore, this is a very interesting thing. It says, what should you have? What should be thing here? It says, well, it's being good character may be more important than being, while virtue of external goods is important, it may be necessary. It might be useful and beneficial, but but if you don't have good character, you don't have good mind, a good mind and good character, then what's going to happen is that you're too much good these things without good mind and good be harmful, right? So, in other words, he says that it is available to those who have excess and adornment of character and mind. You can have that, but behave moderately in respect to the external acquisitions of good things, because of their good character, good mind, rather than those who possess more of the latter, good things, right? But who are deficient in the former. In other words, good character and good mind, right? Yet this is easy remedied. This can also be remedied. This can yet this can also be remedied, readily seen by those investigating on the basis of argument. In other words, you look at this what is said here is also seen in the argument, right? External things like any instrument have a limit. Everything useful belong everything useful belongs among those things those things in excess of which must necessarily be either harmful or not beneficial to those who have them. Okay, this is regarding, he's going to say how he reads this. This is belong with the manuscript rather than belongs among those things with excess rather than the Ismicher and Dirtsigner, it is some purpose of these in excess. Okay, this is different translations how this passage, something in this passage can be read two ways. He's going to read it this way: that everything belongs. In other words, actually, what is saying said here? This is basically the what we call the law of diminishing marginal returns. So external things and things. Any kind of thing, if you have too much of it, it can be as high. It doesn't have a. This is the idea of diminishing marginal utility, diminishing marginal returns. That some external. Now he's saying external things. If you have too much, there's going to be a limit to them, limit to external things. Because why? Because at a certain point you don't get the same benefit. You get more of it, but then you get less benefit from it. And this is also true, I would argue, bodily things as well. The question of the spirit, that's another thing. The soul this may not apply to the soul. The things of the spirit may not have this utility diminishing. This is what the idea of anything that has utility, usefulness, material benefit. This is going to have a limit, right? And I think he's saying this external things like instruments have a limit, right? That internal in the case of each of the good things concerning with the soul, however, the more it is in excess, the more useful it must necessarily be. For indeed, one should attribute to these things not only what is cologne, fine, beautiful, fine, noble, but what is useful as well. So therefore, with the soul, in other words, with the external things in the body, there's these external things. That's with external things, material goods, external things. There's a limit. It's because they're more like tools. The soul, this is to an extreme. The body, not so much. The body is like the external things. There's limits, right? But the soul, there seems to be no limit implied. In fact, the more the better, right? With the souls, it seems to be. Which maybe but wait a minute. But the body, there is okay. So that's the question: is does if the soul has connected to the body, then is not the if the body is limited, and then is not the soul limited as well? Okay, that's the whole problem here, right? Things with connected with the soul, and in the case of each of the good things connected with the soul, however, the more it is in excess, the more useful must necessarily be. If indeed one should attribute these things not only to what is noble or beautiful or kalos, but what is useful as well. In general, it is clear, we shall assert, that the best state of each thing in relation to each other corresponds with respect to its preeminence to the distance between the things of which we assert that these are states, are conditions, are states. In other words, the relations of these things, that the best state, the best condition of each thing in relation to each other corresponds with respect to its preeminence, the thing, to the distance between the things of which we assert that these are states. So, if the soul is more honorable, more beautiful, more, this is cologne, I think the most of this, honorable, a noble, beautiful, right, than both property and the body, both simply, and for us, the best state, the best condition of each must necessarily stand in the same relation as these things among themselves. So the soul must be the body and the property, external things, material things, external things, the body, um, and the soul. The soul must have preeminence. Okay. Further, it is for the sake of the soul that these things are naturally choiceworthy, and that all sensible persons should choose them, and not the soul for the sake of them. So therefore, the soul, in other words, he's saying that it's the soul should get preeminence. It's not that we should. It's not that the soul is not a means to get body and get material goods or these things, but rather these things are achieved to make to help better that. Okay. The same amount of happiness, that same amount of happiness falls to each person as of virtue and prudence, and action in accordance with these. So this the same amount of happiness falls to each person as of virtue and prudence, and action in accordance action in accordance with virtue and prudence. Therefore, with these, therefore, may stand as agreed by us. Okay, so he's repeating what he's been kind of asserting to what has been said about the ethics in that sense, right? So that the happiness we get, each of us, is tied to our ability to engage in virtue and prudence, arete, right? This is the whole account of the ethics, right? And both the ethics, the virtue of character and the virtue of mind, right? These seem to be this and this, and that therefore happiness is tied to this. Happiness or eudaimonia is tied to living the life of virtue and the mind of achieving this, right? We may use the God as testimony to this. So the divine seems to be that the God here is the authority that supports this, the testimony of the God. He is happy and blessed. The God is happy, yet not through any of the external goods, but rather through himself, and and by being of a certain quality of his nature. So it's God by his quality, his nature. God is not good because of external things. He's good because of his nature and his internal things, right? And it is on account that good fortune necessarily differs from happiness. So good fortune and happiness are not the same thing. So on account of this, that good fortune and differs from happiness. Of the good things that are external to the soul, the cause is chance and fortune. But no one is just or sound by fortune or through fortune. So, in other words, one is not just or sound because they have luck. They're just or sound, they have good judgment because they are virtuous. Okay, one can be wealthy through virtue or fortune. Not see, you can get virtue can make you wealthy, but fortune can make you wealthy. You can be virtuous, but external things like good health, wealth, and health, fortune is subject to. But goodness of soul, this is not something that fortune affects or chance effects. He says here. Next, and requiring the same arguments, is the assertion that the best city is happy and acts beautifully. Again, here and throughout the discussion, the phrase acts finely, kalos petron, and acts well, et petron, bears the idiomatic meaning do well and prosper. Kalos is regularly to be regarded as noble to a discussion. Why? Kalos is kalos. Kalos can mean good, noble, beautiful, fine. Otherwise, he's used the term fine. I would argue you should always remember I think beautiful is better. Beautiful and good. Beautiful and noble. Here in this sense. So therefore, so therefore, the best city is happy and acts beautifully, finely, right, and nobly, right. It is impossible to act finely without acting to achieve beautiful things, fine things. You can't act finely without unless if your goal is not to if you don't try to how can you act beautifully to bring about base things? You can't. There's a connection, and he seems to suggest that the means you do something is tied to the end you're doing it. It's interesting. The ends and means are connected here in a way. In other words, if the end is base, you, the beautiful way, you cannot act cologne about base things. You can moderate baseness, but you cannot make it. It cannot be good, cannot be beautiful, cannot be cologne. But there is no beautiful deed, either of a man or of a city, that is separate from virtue and prudence. So virtue and prudence is tied to the beautiful, the good. So that no deed, no beautiful deed of either a man or a city that can be separate. Virtue and prudence always is tied to the beautiful, the kalos, the noble, the beautiful. Okay? The the courage, justice, and prudence of a city have the same power and form as those things human beings share in individually, who are called just, prudent, and sound. So here, there is almost an echo that that differs from what he's talked about earlier in Book 3. Book 3, he suggests that collectively, in other words, that inferior men collectively can produce judgment and outcomes better than the best men, as good as or better than the best men, as long as they're not overly slavish. That's Book 3. In Book 3, I think chapter 10 and 11. I think I remember 10, maybe 11. Um, but here he seems to suggest that and almost echoing the Republic in a certain sense, that the best city, this best city and the best person is identical here in regards to this question. The city and the soul seems to be being treated here as the simple thing, where earlier he suggests that they're not simple. Okay, the courage, justice, and prudence of a city have the same power and form of those things human beings share individually, who are called just, prudent, and sound. So that what is true about the city is also what is true about the individual is true about the city, and vice versa, right? What is true about the individual is true about the city. So the individual and the city are kind of like this, right? So that is kind of correct, right? The city is not like the soul, the city, but the city, the soul. Okay. Not the city, the soul, but rather the soul, the city. Okay, that's it. Mhm. Okay, what is going on here? Next thing. These things, as far as they go, may stand as a preface for a discourse. So, what is the best way of life? This has been about the highest, the soul, things of the soul are the highest, the body and external goods are the lowest. No, these are a preface for our discourses. For it is not possible either. For it is not possible either not to touch on them or to exhaust all the arguments pertaining to them. These things, other tasks of an inquiry, belong to another occasion. There was again 5 here, literally another sort of leisure. Um, in other words, these things belong to another something, an occasion or a point of leisure. These things are not to touch on. In other words, it's not possible to either to touch on them or to exhaust all these pertaining these things. And hence, this task for doing that is inquiry requires leisure to do that. Right? I think that's a better thing about this. For the present, let us presuppose as this much, that the best way of so if this is we're having in other words, the real discussion of this is beyond the scope of what we're going to do here. Requires this. In fact, that's the whole point of philosophy, right? Rather, now we're starting a presupposition here. For let us presuppose this much, that the best way of that the best way of life, both separately for each individual and in common for cities, is that accompanied by virtue. Okay, so that this is a presupposition. This is not. We have not resolved this. In other words, the whole discussion requires leisure and time that we not have for this. So, therefore, instead of giving us a whole discussion about this in a more way that's even possible in that sense, we're going to make a presupposition. That presupposition is this. Uh, for let's presuppose this much, that the best way of life, both both separately of each individual and common for cities, is that accompanied by virtue. So they must have the way of life that must be accompanied by virtue. The virtue that is equipped to such an extent as to allow them to take part in the actions that accord with virtue. Arete. In other words, whoa, this is interesting. This seems to be, in other words, virtue that is that is equipped to the extent as it is allows them. They must be equipped. In other words, the question is virtue that is equipped. That they must have equipped. The equipment you must have enough equipment, external things, both body and external things. These things you must have enough of them to allow them to take part in the actions that accord with virtue. With regard to with regard to those in regard to those who dispute such a argument, we must pass over them for the purposes of the present inquiry, but shall make a thorough investigation later if anyone happens not to be persuaded by what has been said. Okay, this is chapter 6. Note 6, the reference would be we get to chapter 13 of book 7. But this is not certain, okay? So we'll get to that this promised discussion here and maybe at chapter 13. The question is that, okay, we're going to stop. This is a presupposition. We're going to presuppose that you must have virtue, but then regarding the external things, you must have virtue. The presupposition is, but then the presupposition is not only that we must presume in virtue, but in order to have that virtue, you're going to have enough external things, both in terms of the material, external goods, and the body that allows you to engage in virtue. That you must have, in order to be able to exercise virtue, you need certain equipment. You need a good body. If you don't have the proper body to exercise virtue, you won't be able to exercise it perfectly. Okay, and if you don't have the resources necessary to engage in virtue, all the virtues, then you're going to have a hard time. It's hard to be if you don't have the resources. It's hard for you to exercise virtue. You don't have leisure. You don't have time. You're free. If you're a slave, it's going to be hard for you to exercise virtue. So therefore, there is this element of that. There is kind of a. We have to presuppose that you have those other things. That's a presupposition that that it presupposes good body, enough resources. Because without these things, it's hard to do that, have that. Okay, so that's how he ends chapter 1 with the presupposition that we're going to deal with this. And that ends our first chapter in that sense of the book of this so-called best regime. Now, we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. Comments, questions, or concerns, or something you want to address. This is now the question here, the best regime about this makes certain assumptions, and we dealt with that here. So, you think you want more clarification or more like this, please ask the questions. Now, if you liked it, please like it. Put your comments there with why you liked it. What you liked, what you didn't like. If you didn't like it, you can say that and say why you didn't like it. We'll learn from this. If you liked it, and or if you're not already subscribed and you want to subscribe, please subscribe. Encourage a friend. Share this if you like this thing. Share it on social media. Share with a friend. Encourage others to subscribe. We need to grow some more. Another thing we could do is if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow the links below. If you want to help financially help me do this channel, you can do this. There's many ways to do it. There's subscribe to our Patreon. I understand there's not many people on it right now, so and oh, you don't do anything for them. You don't. Well, if I, maybe by when you see this, someone see this 20 years from now, something this long dead. I'll be, but let's hope that this is, people will see this and benefit from this. Um, Another way you can help me is buy my book. Buying the book will be useful because it gives me some money, the profit from this. You buy it directly from Lulu, I get the profit. Okay. You buy it from Amazon, I'll get something from them, but not a lot. Amazon, Barnes Noble, publisher, I'll get something. But if you buy it from Lulu, I'll get what Amazon gets. I'll get what the bookstores get. So that's why I recommend Lulu. Of course, I understand that Amazon may ship it to you free. It's not a cheap book anymore because of the size of it. And what is this? This is not a commentary, not this. It's a kind of study guide, Cliff's Notes on the politics. It offers chapter by chapter a summary, kind of like a guide to access the book. It offers kind of not mere summaries, but also some outlines, diagrams, charts of the various parts of the text, chapters and sections of the text that are complicated to help you get a grasp of the text and the grasp of how to understand the text and like we've been doing in this our time here. So if you want to help, you want to do that, please do buy the book. With that, I'd like to say thank you for being with us today, and we will see you tomorrow when we look at chapter 2. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good day.